Stars
Podcast. This is the
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
jammed-packed podcast for this week. Got a lot to talk about with this one, so we will not waste a whole lot of time with the intros here. Of course, I always like to welcome new and returning viewers to the Five Starr Wrestling Report podcast. Make sure that if you are watching for the first time that you subscribe, click the bell icon, leave a comment down below, and please like the video for me. We are here on YouTube and Rumble each Monday and Friday to bring you reports on pro wrestling content. Today, for our Friday show, we have the usual AEW Dynamite report to run down, as well as the continuation of our retro review series. Part of our retro review series. We have been recapping the archived episodes of NWA World Championship Wrestling and World Class Championship Wrestling from the beginning. Unfortunately, with World Class, the next two weekly episodes are not archived in the library on Peacock, so we are going to be subbing out the World Class reports for this week and next week for two additional retro reviews. This week, we are going to be talking about SuperBrawl VI from WCW, which just so happened to take place on this very day, 26 years ago. And next week, we will be recapping WWF's 6th In Your House event, which took place on February 18th of that same year. And again, we will get to the classic content eventually, but we will begin with running down this episode of Dynamite from Wednesday night, a show that I would classify as filled with some memorable moments, but questionable in terms of overall execution. And, that was a rather odd start to the program. And I have said for a while it would be kind of nice if AEW started their show once in a blue moon with something other than a meaningless TV match that we'll all forget the minute it's over. Well, they spiced things up for a change this week. Out comes Wardlow with cardboard cutouts of MJF's sit-down pose and wrist-tape chokehold on CM Punk from last week. And basically the whole premise behind the first part of the promo was the Pinnacle faction all got custom introductions with Justin Roberts reading from a cue card. Everyone except Wardlow, obviously. And MJF gets the big heat intro. He's being carried out on one of those thrown Dillia Bobs, which was mostly hilarious, with Tony Schiavone offering $1,000 to see the guys carrying the throne just drop MJF on his ass coming down the ramp. But anyway, MJF's in there ramming down people's throats. The fact that he beat Punk twice in Chicago last week. They did a deal where Shawn Spears put up a graphic on the Jumbotron regarding the newest t-shirt on AEWshop.com, which is a shirt that reads, "Better than the best in the world." Good plug. And long story short with all that, the idea is that MJF is grateful for being able to beat Punk last week thanks to Shawn Spears, who helped him train in the back prior to the match. Translation, fuck you, Wardlow. And right before MJF can turn his attention to the world title, out comes Punk to demand a rematch with MJF. And this time, Punk brings out Darby Allin and Sting as backup. So he does have friends after all, as it turns out. And this is all good here, but things really started to get kind of finicky once we got past this point. Because first, Punk says that he wants a match with Wardlow, the guy that essentially beat Punk last week because of all the run-in shit at the end. But then Dax gets on the stick, and says that he wants a rematch against Punk, Darby, and Sting from the six-man that they had on the last Dynamite of 2021. And then Punk initially accepts that challenge, but then but MJF chimes in, and well, this wasn't particularly explained well, but he was basically trying to get at the fact that it's FTR versus Punk and a mystery guy for later in the night, but Punk can't choose Darby or Sting as a partner for some reason. And if Punk wins, he gets the rematch with MJF. And I mean, it was a good segment. Like, there was some good material in there by and large. But I've critiqued this before with AEW promo segments. And, especially when it comes to a lot of MJF's material on this show. It's like they try to pack so much shit into this segment all at once, and it's just really hard to digest the material. Like, really, I would have been fine with them doing everything they did here up to teasing the six-man tag rematch. It would have been perfect. But it's exactly like I complained about with a lot of elements of the Punk MJF match from last week. Just trying to get way too cute with things instead of keeping it simple. Simple but effective is always more preferred than complex and ineffectual. Do we really need the whole thing with Dax and Cash challenging Punk to a rematch, only for MJF to make random stipulations that Punk can get the rematch if he beats FTR, but he can't use Darby and Sting as a partner? It's just, it's overly complicated for the sake of being overly complicated. And all this really did at the end of the day was drag out a segment for like 3 minutes longer than necessary. And especially on this show where they already got too much shit going on to begin with, they could have just shaved off the last few minutes of this segment and it still would have worked. But like I said, it's nitpicky. The match was to come later on, and yeah, good segment, but just too much material to digest in one sitting. That's my only complaint about it. So we come back from the break, and we had Andrade, Sting, and Darby in some dark, secluded location of the building. Perhaps the bowels of the building. Right, Vince? Right? And, well, it's the same shit they've been doing with these guys for weeks now, and it sucked. Andrade wants Darby in his group. Darby says no, and Sting's there to pick up a paycheck and wondering why he's being associated with all this stuff on television. Let me know if I'm missing anything here. Aside from my usual complaint that I can never understand a goddamn word Andrade ever says. So then we get Wardlow versus The Blade in a quick squash. Well, squash. Wasn't necessarily quick. Would have preferred to see Wardlow wrestle The Butcher. That would have been a fun big guy match. It was fine. Again, crowd's really starting to get behind Wardlow more and more, but like, are we just supposed to totally forget that they just beat Wardlow on TV 3 weeks ago? Like, if their idea is to have the guy smash through dudes like Goldberg, apparently AEW has already forgotten the key thing that made Goldberg work. The fact that he never lost. That on top of the fact that Goldberg didn't sell for long periods either. I mean, I like watching Wardlow kill dudes, but I'm also not going to neglect the fact that I just saw him do a clean job less than a month ago when it really wasn't called for. We then follow this up with, quote from Excalibur, something puzzling from Penta El Cielo. I agree. Puzzling would describe a lot of Penta's professional wrestling ability. I would maybe better accurately describe it as haphazard or reckless, but puzzling works too, I guess. So, for our next WWE-like segment on AEW TV, we get the Inner Circle Pizza out to the ring for a team meeting, airing dirty laundry on the show. Well, whatever it was, this actually ended up being a lot better than I initially thought it would be going in. I was expecting a total WWE skit here with guys playing whose line is it and attempting to act angry on camera. But and credit where it's due, this was not bad. Wasn't a fan of everything that was said here, but at least I can say it built to something. And it wasn't just guys pot-shotting and doing meaningless bantering back and forth with insider jokes and attempting to throw out a bunch of gotcha lines that no one cares about. You know, Santana in particular was really great in this segment. I totally forgot that guy could actually cut a good promo. And granted, I could probably sit here and nitpick the material that he said. Yeah, I really didn't need to hear Santana bitching and blaming Jericho for the fact that they aren't the tag team champions, especially if they're supposed to be baby faces. But, I mean, the material made sense. Santana and Ortiz feel like they're bit players. They see through the fact that the Inner Circle has always been about Jericho, which, I mean, really hard to deny that point, right? And they won out. There was a very awkward moment here where Sammy, God bless the guy, he tried to show emotion. And it came off about as contrived and fake as you'd imagine it would. But he ended up walking out again. The line in there with Jericho talking about him signing the wrong members of LAX, it actually took me a minute to realize, oh yeah, that's right. Didn't TNA do a program years back where Santana and Ortiz wrestled Homicide and Hernandez for the rights to the LAX name? Of course, I see Homicide on NWA programming every week. Haven't seen Hernandez in years, though. But like I said, it set up Santana and Ortiz against Jericho and Jake Hager next week. Oh yeah, Jake Hager was there too. Just kind of standing there blankly like he's done for most of his AEW run. And, well, I guess the stips are they're going to fight, and then they're apparently supposed to go back to being one big happy family or something. It's like I said, you know, Santana did a good promo here, and he brought up some good arguments, but I'm sorry, cut and dry, I just don't give a shit about this feud. The Inner Circle faction is so inconsequential now, it's not even like there's a real urgency to see the group officially break up. Like, Sammy's been in and out of the group for so long, Hager's completely irrelevant, Jericho, I just want to go away entirely, and Santana and Ortiz, I don't know, it's like with AEW's already over-bloated tag division, are they really going to stand out at this point on their own? Probably not. And I still have no idea how Eddie Kingston fits into the equation. Like, unless the payoff is him aligning with Santana and Ortiz as heels, and it's Kingston versus Jericho at the pay-per-view. Again, something I'm really not clamoring to see all that much. Yeah, I really don't know what's going on in this program. And that was immediately followed with the epitome of Death TV featuring the Beta Bucks. Apparently we're getting the long-awaited match that I totally forgot was supposed to happen a couple weeks back. It is Roppongi Vice versus the Bucks on Rampage, but for realsies. And, of course, the segment ended in a brawl. Who didn't see that coming? Show of hands. What was baffling here was that while the brawl was ongoing, Cole and the Betas hit Rocky with the BTE trigger, and then we see a man walk into the frame, with his back turned to the camera, mind you, and somehow, some way, Excalibur, the dumbest fucking mark in the business today, was able to discern that this man was Jay White without seeing his face first. Because nothing can ever be a surprise with AEW. We can never speculate on a new guy showing up in the company. It's always, oh my god, that's so-and-so from PWG. He wrestled on the indie circuit for 15 years, multiple-time world champion in 6 different promotions in England, former national champion of so-and-so league. And it's just like, fuck you. Seriously, just fuck you. Stop presuming that everyone watching knows what the fuck you're talking about and learn how to actually sell professional wrestling to a broadcast audience. Like, I know that this product is solely a niche product, which is why this company is never going to succeed beyond where they are at this point. But you want to do yourselves a favor? Start with suspension and anticipation of new arrivals. Oh my God, is that who I think it is? Well, I think I recognize him from somewhere else, but I can't put my finger on it. Or, wow, what an impact from this new arrival to the company. I'd sure like to get more clarification on who this guy is and what his goals are in AEW. He may be a force to reckon with. Tony, go interview that guy. No, with AEW, it's same shit every time. That's Jay White from New Japan Wrestling, Bullet Club member, former arch rival of Kenny Omega, former IWGP Heavyweight Champion, but you already knew that anyway. Says nobody, except the Smart Mark crowd. Meanwhile, everyone else that's watching is like, who in the fuck is Jay White? To which I respond with, doesn't matter, he'll be irrelevant in 3 months flat. God, these people are so stupid. That brings us to, I believe, what most people consider the highlight of the program, the Forbidden Door match, which I also think was a qualifying match for that ladder deal at the pay-per-view. Winner gets a TNT championship match or something. I don't know. It was never really explained well, but I believe it was a qualifying match. And speaking of these people being stupid and having no idea what they're doing, in order to set up the big surprise debut for the show, they precede said big surprise debut with a segment involving a surprise debut. Idiots. But yes, the cat was out of the bag. Out comes Keith Lee for a match with Isaiah Cassidy. Because if there's one thing that AEW desperately needed on their program, after just having Jay White show up in the previous skit, it's adding another wrestler to the roster that's just going to get lost in the shuffle in 6 months. That's what AEW does, right? They sign people without actually having plans for them, and they end up becoming Jags before they ever have a chance to break from the pack. And look, I'm not going to sit here and shit on Keith's debut. I was a big fan of Keith's work in NXT. And, that period where he was the dual champion, that was some of the best work I had ever seen Keith do. He's a talented big guy, solid promo, good facials. He's got a lot of upside. The weight thing's kind of a different story. It could just be a presentation thing in the way AEW films their shows, but Keith did look substantially bigger than usual. Certainly looked bigger than he was toward his tail end of his run with WWE. So, if he's packed on a few pounds since his absence, that's probably not a good thing, especially for a guy like Keith Lee. But, I don't know. My problem, again, it all goes back to the nature of AEW's booking problem. Too many people, not enough TV time. Unless it's a solution where they're going to start weeding out more of the talent pool in the coming months, track record's not good for AEW when it comes to effectively spotlighting guys, especially the talented ones. I really would like to think that AEW will get it right with Keith Lee, but given how a lot of their new arrivals show up, I'm not giving them the benefit of the doubt. They haven't earned it. I see nothing different turning out for him than I've seen with what's happened with guys like Andrade and Malachi Black, Ruby Riott, Adam Cole, Kyle O'Reilly, Bobby Fish. You name the fucking former NXT guy or gal. Unless they rocket ship this guy to the world title in the next year, my hopes are not high for Keith Lee in AEW. I'd even be on par with them sending him right toward the TNT title. I understand that I'll basically pair babyface versus babyface with Sammy, but, they got to do something big with him. And I know it sucks to hear, but the stats are kind of in my favor here when it comes to AEW. They are really good at signing guys to long-term contracts, but they have zero fucking clue what to do with them the minute they're signed. So, I mean, if there ever is a time where you just push someone straight to a championship, Keith Lee's the guy to do it with. And again, it doesn't even necessarily have to be the world title right away. Just have him win that ladder match at the pay-per-view, send him at Sammy, have him squash him in 2 minutes to win the belt, and, well, I think we're getting somewhere. Soon we get the FTR versus CM Punk and Mystery Partner tag. Part of me was really hoping it would be Bryan Danielson, but, well, I guess you could say I was close. It is someone closely affiliated with Danielson. Not the guy I wanted to see, but what can you do? Yeah, it was Jon Moxley. Nech. And on the subject of Bryan Danielson, conspicuous by his absence, that was a pretty good tag match, minus most of the stuff Mox did. But God, the entire time I'm watching it, I'm watching them flash up all these graphics on the screen for the still to come segments on the show. And there's like 3 or 4 things rapidly showing up on the screen. And the only thing I could think the entire time was too much shit. You know, especially by the time the match was over and I looked at the clock, there was a little over 30 minutes left in the show. I'm like, how in the fuck are they supposed to fit in a TBS championship match, a 5-minute Serena Deeb challenge, and a fucking Texas death match in that amount of time? Somehow they did, but to say it was rushed would probably be understating it. I love FTR. Punk's great. Mox is Mox. I will say there wasn't anything noticeably embarrassing or stupid that I saw from him this time, with the exception of the one spot where they were teasing the hot tag to Punk, and you see Punk fighting Cash on the apron, well enough away from his corner, and not only does Moxley turn to look at Punk fighting on the polar opposite end of the ring apron, but for reasons that I cannot explain to you, Moxley decided to fall over to his corner anyway to do the tag, even though he clearly saw that Punk was nowhere near the corner. Why did Moxley do that spot? Because he's an idiot. It did get pretty chaotic and messy in there by the end, and you know, the spot where Tully didn't want to go up for the GTS was, well, apparent, shall we say. But Punk pinned Cash, so he presumably gets the rematch with MJF, and like I said, it was good. Probably could have been better if Danielson was in it. Maybe if they saved the match for next week and give it a little more time to breathe, but what's done is done. Certainly not the worst segment on the show. Jade Cargill had a very, very bad TBS championship match that I really don't even want to bother talking about. You had one green, inexperienced worker having to go in there to try and carry another green, inexperienced worker on live television. It went about as well as you'd expect a match like that to go. Fucking brutal. The Cutler Cam skit in the back with the Bucks and Adam Cole was notable for primarily one thing. Either Matt Jackson has the worst spray tan in the business today, or Adam Cole is now paler than Macaulay Culkin. Serena's 5-minute open challenge was just a 60-second squash against some chick named Katie Arquette. I presume it's convenient that her last name is Arquette and that she's not a relative of David. Although given the fact that we have seen David Arquette on the show before, and he has apparently worked indie matches in the last several years, nothing surprises me in professional wrestling anymore. And that's like I noted with the FTR Punk tag match. Something like this probably should have been a bigger deal than it ended up being, but you know, when you try to cram in 48 segments into 2 hours of TV time, there are certain things that just aren't going to stand out. This was rushed. It didn't get enough attention or time devoted to why Serena was even doing a 5-minute challenge to begin with, aside from the fact that her last match with Shida ended under the 5-minute mark. And by the end, it was just another segment on the show. And I like Serena, but this just didn't come off well. So with approximately 20 minutes left in the program, somehow they allotted enough time for this. But we get our world title match. Hangman Page and Lance Archer in a Texas death match. Because, oh, why not? Why do a regular singles match first when you can just dive headfirst into the garbage hardcore match? Not like we don't already get 60 of those kinds of matches in AEW every month. And it kickstarts with both guys brawling in the back before they even get to the ring. They fought through the tunnel out to the staging area. Here's something for the AEW botch videography. They do a spot 2 minutes into this match where Page throws Archer through a gimmicked glass paneling that was covering the heel entrance tunnel. And these people were actually stupid enough to show several camera angles of Archer going through the glass, including a view from the inside of the tunnel, where we clearly see the giant rectangular glass cutout that Archer was supposed to go through. These people are so WCW 2000, it's not even funny. Another hilariously great AEW moment occurred pretty much like 2 minutes after that spot. While Page and Archer are doing crowd brawling and all the usual circus-level garbage outside the ring, there's Dan Lambert in the ring, comically and quickly trying to unhook the top turnbuckle in order to prevent Hangman Page from doing the buckshot. But the comical part of the whole thing was that while they are focusing the camera on Page and Archer fighting outside the ring, every 10 seconds or so, they would keep cutting back to a camera shot of Lambert trying to furiously unhook this buckle. You could totally tell he was struggling to get this thing unhooked. And all the while, there's a cameraman making sure he films it live. Just to let you know, hey, look at that dipshit. Can't even unhook the fucking buckle. I died watching this live. Please tell me someone archives that clip for AEW botches. I will be saddened if I do not see that turn up on YouTube in the next month or so. It was like a total Looney Tunes skit. Somewhere in the middle of this match, this Texas death match became a last man standing where apparently you could only win via knockout or tap out. Could have fooled me. Maybe it would have been nice to know what the stips were a couple weeks back when they announced the fucking thing. Oh, but right. I'm sorry. I'm just supposed to know that Texas death matches are knockout submission falls only. Because everybody knows that, right? Of course. We had Double Juice. Adam Page has now had 3 consecutive world title defenses now on this show. I believe all 3 of which have resulted in him doing blade jobs. So, apparently Hangman Page is on his way to becoming the next Ric Flair. Again, more superfluous angles taking place during this match. There's a random part where, for absolutely no reason I can conceive of, Jake Roberts got involved. He decked Page with a short arm clothesline, and then he goes to tease giving Page the DDT on the floor, but Archer intervenes and pushes him away. Why? I have no idea. And moreover, I don't care. We had barbed wire in there, because of course we did. My favorite angle in garbage wrestling matches are where guys go to set up tables on the outside, and then they walk away from the tables to let you know it's a tease. And the finish to the match, one of the lamest and most contrived finishes I've seen in God knows how long. Well, let me back up first. So there's a part moments before where Page rips off the barbed wire from one of the steel chairs, and he wraps the barbed wire around his arm, and he starts, pounding away on Archer or whatever. And somewhere in this mess, Paul Turner decides to just start picking up scraps of barbed wire. because, I don't know, I guess he was bored or something. And while he is bent over picking up the barbed wire, this allows Page to use Turner's back as a launching pad so he can spring off of him and hit Archer with the buckshot lariat as they go sailing well over the first table set up on the outside, barely clear the second table. And that is the point where Page beats the 10 count back into the ring and wins. So, thanks for coming, Archer. Back to mid-card purgatory for you, I guess. And we weren't done there, because after Page retains, out comes Adam Cole to... Well, I figured it would be the opportune moment for him to get some heat back and lay out the beaten champion to send a message and, I don't know, proclaim that he's next in line for the belt or something like that. But nope, he just comes in to snag the belt from the ref, put it on Page's shoulder, and then he walks out. And Jesus Christ, I mean, I even wrote this down the moment it happened. As soon as Cole picked up that world title, the first thought I had was, oh my God, the belt is bigger than him. And when he did that brief face-off with Page, dude, it looked like a fucking 8th grader standing up to the senior high school varsity football player. Like, was that really their way to get me excited to see Page and Cole for the belt at the pay-per-view? The old challenger pretends to show respect by putting the belt on the champ's shoulder. Dude. Lame. Yeah, I said these people have a lot to do to get me back on board with Adam Cole after all the crap that they put him through since he's shown up. If this was their genius way to get Cole back on my good side with having him come in and do the lame exchange with Hangman Page at the end of the show here, failure. And while it may seem like I hated a lot of the stuff on the show this week, I actually didn't hate the show overall when it was said and done. It is... I think I've determined at this point. It is impossible for me to even do an overall grade for this show because everything with AEW is so all over the map and a mishmash of good, bad, and abysmal. I drive myself crazy trying to break down how I felt about the show as a whole. Generally, my same thoughts hold over from what I've said in previous closing recaps. There's a couple good things sprinkled in on the show, and a lot of horrible stuff or stuff that I just don't really find appealing, and way too much freaking bullshit going on all the time. The Keith Lee debut was cool, but I'm more so interested in seeing whether or not they drop the ball with him. Again, it's a track record problem with AEW when it comes to all the guys that have jumped ship from NXT or WWE. Most of the crossovers have been big letdowns. That includes Adam Cole, the guy that they're apparently programming to go after Page as the next world title challenger. And I don't know, I mean, the whole conspiracy theory about AEW trying to take the Vince McMahon approach of sabotaging all the NXT crossovers that are coming to AEW, I don't really know if I buy that. It's just incompetence. And moreover, it's the problem of signing guys to deals but having absolutely no idea or vision of how you want to book them. That's really what it boils down to. Tony Khan opens up the pocketbook. He signs guys to big money deals because he can afford it, but he just doesn't know how to utilize any of them. It's just cut and dry. That's the problem. I like the Pinnacle Punk stuff in the opener. The Wardlow slow burn face turn is being well done. I enjoyed the FTR Moxley Punk match for what it was. But again, it's all wrapped up into a singular bubble of the only redeeming quality on this show right now being CM Punk and or MJF material. Like, Hangman Page is still not clicking for me as the world champion. Cole's been completely neutered. The women's match was the usual bad match, and the rest of the show is... it's the rest. It's a bunch of sporadic random shit happening with guys that aren't over, and aside from the hardcore smart crowd, no one cares about. And I wish all the best for Keith Lee in AEW because he's a talented dude. But seeing him in there with Matt Hardy's crew, I mean, that's already not really putting him in a great starting position. Not unless he just smashes and runs through all of them in the next several weeks before they elevate him to bigger spots. I'd love to see that guy work a program with someone like a Powerhouse Hobbs or a Ricky Starks. That could be some great TV. But it's all in the execution. What do they do with him? Guess we'll see. So moving along to the retro part of our Friday podcast, getting back on track with NWA World Championship Wrestling from February 8th, 1986. And we begin with highlights of the Rock and Roll Express versus the Midnight Express from the Superstars on the Superstation program, where the Midnight Express defeated the Rock and Roll Express to win the NWA World Tag Team Championships. And we did get clips of the finish toward the end of the program. But having gone back and done some follow-up research on why there did not seem to be an NWA World Championship Wrestling Superstation show from February 1st, I think I figured it out. So on February 7th, 1986, WCW held its Superstars on the Superstation event on TBS. However, the show was taped on February 2nd, then it was aired on the 7th. So I believe that accounted for the absence of a February 1st show. They were, in fact, preparing to tape this show in the Omni on February 2nd, and I guess they didn't want to do back-to-back programs. Now, I could be entirely wrong about that, but that seemed to be the only logic that I can make of the whole thing. Which, it does kind of make me angry that I did not just try to at least find some matches from the Superstars on the Superstation show and just review that, but what can you do? I'm human. And my dates get all fucked up around this point because of all the wacky taping schedules and really just the weird way professional wrestling was done around this time. It was like an entirely different time zone that these people existed in back in the day. So they cut to the booth, where Tony Schiavone had let everyone know that he was flying solo for the night. David Crockett was on assignment, whatever the hell that means. And while Tony was definitely fine by himself, I did miss David's commentary on this show. Tony was also not really given a whole lot to work with on this one in terms of quality programming, so perhaps that accounted for why I probably could have used a little dose of David Markout commentary on this one. Jimmy Valiant versus David Dellinger was the opening match. The highlight of the entire thing was Valiant grabbing the large black woman in the front row and proceeding to force his tongue down her throat. A very unsettling TV moment where the only thing I could think after it happened was lawsuit. And upon ringing of the bell, they proceeded to do every Jimmy Valiant match where he just did a bunch of heel moves like the eye raking and the throat gouging. He did a lot of "oh right" screaming, to which the fans actually began mocking and laughing at him for doing so. And there's a hilariously great part during the match where Tony Schiavone nonchalantly drops the line, "good wrestling." High comedy. And then after Valiant won, he joined Tony at the booth to not stick his tongue down his throat, but to basically call out J.J. Dillon and Tully Blanchard, and I think implied that he wanted to go get into a fight with people in the city. Which, knowing Jimmy Valiant, it's not entirely implausible to believe that would not have actually happened. Coming back from the break, we had the Weasel Paul Jones and the Barbarian at the booth. And he basically just put over Barbarian and buried Ron Bass. Some line in here that the only good Ron Bass was good for was drinking cow milk straight from the udders. And there are many innuendos one could come up with to describe that imagery. The only thing that made it even more hysterical was Paul Jones having to insinuate that he was incapable of completing this repulsive task. And I love Paul Jones. I have played audio clips of some of his rather great promo material on this show before. This was not one of them. And we cut to the ring where the Road Warriors killed Kent Glover and Brody Chase in a minute or so. I actually got plenty more to come with the Road Warriors on this coming podcast, especially by the time we get to that SuperBrawl show later in the retro review session. But just a boring squash. Nothing to really note about it. They did do a post-match promo with Paul Ellering. Again, the entire premise of the promo being centered around talking about how they hate Russians and that they're nothing but low-life scum and ugly bastards. And while, yes, we're all pretty sure that Hawk and Animal are not generalizing here and that they are purely speaking of their hatred for Ivan and Nikita, it is rather funny to just hear how over-the-top these guys' promos were back in the day, just spouting off how much they despise Russian culture and what they stand for. I believe the correct answer was communism. I also did get a kick out of Animal's line in here, where he challenged the Russians to meet Hawk and Animal in any kind of match that didn't directly involve the heels running away. Couldn't just outright say, meet us in a cage. No, he had to leave the ball in their court. Because he's a nice guy, you see. Then we had Ron Garvin versus the Golden Terror. Dull. Garvin won with the knockout punch, and then he did a promo after the break. Hideous. Look, it is no secret by now. I've said this, I don't know, a dozen or so times in reviewing these retro shows. Growing up, I was not what you would call a stereotypical normal wrestling fan. Even at the age of like 3 or 4, I could probably tell you with a straight face that Ronnie Garvin bored me to tears as a kid. And even though all of Ric Flair and Dusty Rhodes' insider and graphic jokes usually went over my head a lot of the time, the only thing I ever saw when those guys were on screen was larger-than-life personalities. I knew they were charismatic, I knew the people cheered for them, and I knew that they were able to suck me in with virtually every word they said. How in the world Ronnie Garvin was the guy in 1986 that they saw as going after Flair in the world title, I will never know. Watching him back in 2022, I mean, I definitely respect his work in the business, and I know he meant a lot for the NWA, especially around this time. And, you know, he was out there trying to take some snarky remarks at Flair with the whole thing of, you know, promising to shut down Space Mountain for good and catching up to him when he reaches the end of the tunnel because he knows Flair's hitting the empty function on the gas tank, blah, blah, blah. But it's like, I don't know. Ronnie always comes across like he's trying way too hard to be charismatic. And, God, he's just blech. He is so generically boring and uninspiring to watch on camera. I have no idea how Flair was able to get so much out of the guy. Well, I mean, he's Ric Flair, but still. Ron Bass versus Larry Clark. The show sucked, by the way. Thought this would probably be the opportune time to make that announcement. I love that the gimmick here with Bass and Barbarian on the show is that they are both trying to prove that they are the strongest men in the world. So, who does Ron Bass get paired with this week? Larry Clark, who was probably no more than 215 pounds at most. I mean, not to say that 215 is small, especially by today's standards. I think in 2022, most of us would agree that 215 is probably classifying guys as super heavyweights now. But, I mean, in comparison to Ron Bass, who was probably a good 6'5", 6'6", easily 280, maybe even pushing 3 bills. Him going in there and throwing around Larry Clark, of all people, for a few minutes, not all that impressive. But again, the post-match promo with him and Tony was just about perfect. The entire key to the story is that Paul Jones figured that by putting up $10,000 on the line for anyone to go against the Barbarian, putting together this little contrived match gimmick where he does not explain the test of strength rules, probably figured most guys would cut tail and run. But even to Ron Bass, 10 grand is 10 grand. And he wants that money, and he wants Barbarian in the ring for the test of strength challenge, but more importantly, he also knows that Jones is a slimeball. So unless they get something documented and signed down on paper, he is not holding his breath that Jones is going to pay up in the end. In other words, the nutshell version of the story is Ron Bass is not a stupid babyface. And more to come with this later on. We had Baby Doll at the booth to basically inform us that Dusty is out filming a movie or something. And I really could not understand a goddamn thing she said over the studio crowd screaming over her the entire time, but can't imagine I missed anything that important. Here's a legendary match. Barbarian versus Tony Zayn. Tony got a bad roll of the dice this week. The Bruise Machine himself going in there to get brutalized and killed by the Barbarian. I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say that Tony Zayn has a worse body physique than Joey Janela. I don't even think it's close. At least Janela shaves his chest and has somewhat of a spray tan. Now, I will say, wouldn't want to be a hypocrite here, I did just note that Ron Bass throwing around Larry Clark to prove he's the strongest man alive, not too impressive. However, even the Barbarian being able to muscle up a guy like Tony Zayn, who was very fat, plumpy, and out of shape, that is quite impressive in proving to be a strong man. So we cut over to Jim Cornette introducing the new World Tag Team Champions, Beautiful Bobby and Loverboy Dennis. And there really wasn't a whole lot to the promo, aside from Jimmy putting over his boys and prepping them for the next squash. I did get a kick out of the moment during this interview where Cornette is in the middle of his promo, and while he's talking, you just see Dennis Condrey, who's standing in between Cornette and Tony. He just starts casually playing with the microphone, and Tony sells it perfectly by just scowling at him with the biggest WTF look on his face. Cackled at that. So that led right into the Midnight Express facing Mike Simani and Don Turner. Okay, so I've noted before that there are many squashes on this show where a whole lot of nothing happens, despite the fact that you've got matches with great talents like the Rock and Roll and the Midnight Express and the Road Warriors. List goes on and on. There was a moment in this match that I don't think I will ever forget as long as I live. And I can't help but think that a guy like Bobby Eaton, God rest his soul, if he were alive today, if he went back and watched this again, I don't think he would ever forget it either. There's a part during this match where the Midnight are in control. And honestly, I can't even tell you if it was Simani or Turner that took the brunt of this. It doesn't matter. But there's a part where there's a job guy laying on the ground, and Dennis goes to pick up Bobby to give him a body slam onto the jobber. When I tell you that Bobby crushed this man's face with his ass, I'm not exaggerating. It is in plain view right in front of the camera, zoomed all the way in. Bobby went up and came down hard on this man's skull. How he didn't die, I'll never know, but Lord Almighty, that looked brutal. And he was totally knocked for a loop. there's actually a part of me that figured Bobby was kind of cognizant of the fact that he just gave this man a concussion, because Bobby starts paintbrushing the guy on the ground going, "You okay? You okay?" Probably thinking to himself, I just committed mass homicide on live television, but god damn it, I still got to get my leg drop in before we can take it home. So Bobby hits the leg drop from the top rope. They end up putting the guy away with that old Red Dragon finisher. I totally forget what they used to call it in Ring of Honor. Not chasing the dragon, because that's the move where the one guy picks the other guy up in a vertical suplex, and then the other guy kicks him and he gets dropped down in the brainbuster. I think it was the high-low, wasn't it? The leg sweep clothesline combo. No, whatever. That move. They won with that. And I think this might have been the end of Don Turner and or Mike Simani as we knew it. What a moment. We had a Russians promo at the booth. Actually, more accurately, it was the Russians and Baron von Rashki, the German. Maybe just start calling them the foreigners. But they replayed the Dusty Magnum attack, the whole tease of laying out Baby Doll, but Dusty took the bullet to save her, that whole deal. And I love the concept of all this because, I mean, yeah, you can view it from a biased, emotionalist perspective and think, the Russians are assholes trying to attack a woman, so clearly they're in the wrong. But me, the rationalist, the guy with common sense, the whole thing's fucking ridiculous. They expect me to feel sympathy for Baby Doll for nearly getting killed by the Russians when she herself deliberately put herself in harm's way to begin with. I don't know. Like, especially in today's culture where it's all blank slate equalism and women and men are the same, that whole woke agenda mindfuckery. Like, I watch this in 2022 and I think, Baby Doll was kind of in the wrong here. Like, what? Did she really think she was going to be able to take out Nikita fucking Koloff of all people? She thought she was going to be a house of fire and run roughshod 3-on-1 to take out the foreigners? Like, unless Baby Doll was an undercover Power Ranger or Superwoman, I ain't buying it. Boring bad match trend continues. Ivan Koloff versus Randy Mulkey. I did laugh at the part here where Ivan was taunting Randy to get up and fight, and you can audibly hear the one fan in the audience scream, "You haven't pinned him yet, you commie." Excellent fan jab. We also had the classic throw the guy to the concrete spot where Ivan dumps the guy. You just hear this splat on the ground. And then when they cut to Randy laying on the outside, you just see a dead body face first prone on the ground. Just put the yellow body tape up and would have been perfect. We had our first of two JJ Tully Blanchard promos where Tully spoke for about a full minute. I could not recall a fucking thing he said. Only thing I heard were 2 or 3 people taunting JJ the entire time. And the best part of the whole thing was JJ beginning to cut his promo, and Tully stops JJ like 2 seconds in to admonish Tony for pulling the mic away from him. And Tony responds by going, "I thought you were done talking." The ad-libs on this show are just classic. Like, easily the best parts of the programming. And the exact reason why scripted promos in wrestling are death TV in every conceivable manner. The only thing from JJ's promo I remember was him making fun of the fact that Tully was going to send Jimmy Valiant to Venus and Mars with 2 straight ring punches. Cool. Then we had the second Paul Jones promo. This is just awesome. He begins his promo with admonishing Ron Bass, saying he doesn't have the guts to get in the ring with the Barbarian. Like, how he doesn't need to worry about what the rules and the steps are for the test of strength because Bass will never get to that point. And while he's doing this heated, fiery promo on Bass, here comes Bass to run Jones down on the stick. Tells him he wants Barbarian in the ring and they can do this fight right here, right now. And after Bass gets in his few jabs, Paul Jones's only response to this is to first demand an apology out of Ron Bass for disrespecting him, which is a classic heel line. And Bass proceeds to respond by backing Jones into the corner of the interview set. Jones cowers in fear, and it ends with Jones promising to reveal the place where the Test of Strength challenge will go down next week. To say that this is the highlight of the show would probably not be saying a whole lot in the grand scheme of things, but this is still a great 2 or 3 minutes of NWA TV. And that led to Baron von Rashki against George South. Hideously boring. There was actually a part in this match. I don't even remember the last time this ever happened to me watching a wrestling match before. There was a good chunk where I completely zoned out with my eyes still glued to the screen. Just totally out the lunch. It must have been a good 2 or 3 minutes of me daydreaming. And when I came to, Baron was still beating on George South, and we still had another about minute 45 seconds of wrestling. That must have been the longest squash, because I think I was out for at least 5 minutes. And this was followed with JJ and Tully back out of the booth for a promo. Again, why this was necessary, I have no idea. I guess they needed to kill some time with another promo, so they just figured, let's get JJ and Tully on the show for 2 separate promos. Why not? Another scenario where I really didn't get a whole lot out of it, except for Tully's line in here where he essentially sugarcoated that Baby Doll is a horrible promo, and that there's a reason he used to have her stand in the background, smile, and not talk. Probably because she wasn't good at it. But the big thing that came out of this was the video that they played, where they aired a Tully and Dusty match from the Superstars and the Superstation. Match ended in a draw, and the big afterbirth featured Tully giving Dusty the pile driver, which, well, in the year 1986 was a severe injury angle, or in some cases curtains for most guys' careers. In 2022, a pile driver would probably be, in most cases, a commercial break spot. And when they cut back to the booth, Tully insisted that the match had a bullshit 20-minute time limit, which is why he's not currently standing there as the National Heavyweight Champion. But he vows that his time is coming. Arn Anderson versus Bill Mulkey, I believe, for the TV title. I began crying with boredom by this point in the show, realizing I had another 20 minutes left. God bless Arn for trying to give Bill Mulkey, of all people, a brief flurry of offense, but by this point, I was kind of over the show and just really wanted them to wrap things up. Arn's promo afterwards was awesome. Essentially went out of his way to say that all the babyfaces in the NWA suck, and everyone knows who the real draws and the great talents are, most of whom are heels. And this was met with people cheering Arn and chanting for the Horsemen, who were heels. Remember when I said that I never gravitated toward the babyfaces at a young age, especially during the mid-'80s? Apparently I wasn't alone in that. Nikita Koloff wrestled Bill Tabb. We had a Rock and Roll Express promo, most of which consisted of Ricky making fun of Jim Cornette's mom, and I believe there was something in there about how Ricky was going to reveal how Mama Cornette made all of her income. So she was a prostitute, huh? No. Everyone's got a story, right? But this was the point where they played the finish of the tag match on the previous night. And well, it had pretty much every flim-flammy, muddled breakdown finish you'd ever seen around this time. Ref bump, outside interference from Cornette, weapon shots, and the screw job finish. And, I mean, in 1986, it was the crime of the century, but In 2022, you see it every fucking week on television, so it really doesn't mean a whole lot by today's standards. But, this was a big moment, and this was one of the key stories of '86. The chase and pursuit of Ricky and Robert to regain their tag belts from the Midnight Express. A great legendary tag feud with some great matches and great moments to come. And our closing match, the Rock and Roll Express taking on Paul Turner and Lee Peck. Well, it was Lee Peak, but they misspelled it. Lee Peck in the graphic. Epic. And this match was so grand because the Rock and Roll are doing this fiery, passionate, semi-babyface promo at the booth, promising they're going to reclaim their belts. And then 2 minutes later, just when I figured they're about to cut to the closing graphics, nope. Rock and Roll got to go in there and beat some ass for a few minutes just to make sure the Midnight Express get the message. And that's exactly what they did. And then afterwards, the heels come out. Cornette starts mocking and poking at the Rock and Roll in the ring. And the show cuts to black with the big face-off between the teams. It's a great closer to the show. The two best things on the show were the Rock and Roll Midnight stuff and the Paul Jones-Ron Bass face-off. And combined, that was a total of maybe 5 minutes of overall screen time in a 90-minute show, which basically meant that there were 85 minutes spent where I was either desperately trying to stay awake or just being severely bored. Now, they're not all going to be a home run. That's really all I can say about it. Not everyone's going to be a banger. And that brings us to WCW SuperBrawl VI in the year 1996. And I think it's important to provide some brief background about where WCW was around this period in '96, and moreover, where the wrestling business in general was around this point. So obviously, for all you historical gurus out there, you will probably remember that 1996 was indeed a big year for World Championship Wrestling, especially by the early summer through the end of the year. By now, we were well into what we all remember as the Monday Night War era of the wrestling business. Monday Nitro had debuted in September of '95, was head-to-head with Raw each Monday night. However, we were still well within the early stages of the war, before the New World Order, the Hogan heel turn, Crow Sting, Nitro beating Raw in the ratings for 83 consecutive weeks. We still had like 3 months or so before Hall and Nash even showed up on Nitro. And for those of you that were well attuned to WCW around this point, I think most people would come to a general consensus that the company was kind of in rough shape from a booking standpoint. Talent pool-wise, WCW was pretty much firing on all cylinders. You had guys like Hogan, Sting, Luger, Macho Man, Flair, Arn Anderson, the Road Warriors. List goes on and on. And especially when you compare that with WWF's talent roster around this period. Like, if you were watching wrestling for star power and roster depth, WCW was the company to watch. But booking-wise, they were still really trying to find their footing in some key departments, as was WWF, let's be honest. In fact, basically from about 93, 94 till mid to late 96, professional wrestling was in the doldrums. And, I especially remember watching WWF in that 94, 95 period as a kid and just thinking, God, this product sucks. The push of King Mabel, Kevin Nash as the WWF champion. Just awful. Meanwhile, on the other station, I'm watching Hogan feud with the Taskmaster, Jimmy Hart, and all the goofball Dungeon of Doom characters. Yeah, 95 and a good chunk of 96, those were Those were some rough times as a wrestling fan. And little did I know that things would only progressively get worse in the business over the course of the next 20 plus years. But like I said, Hogan was still going against the grain here with sporting the American hero red and yellow gear, despite getting pretty substantially booed. And he was well into his cartoony program with the Dungeon of Doom, which was, just bad. Not too soon after this pay-per-view, I think they ended up doing that whole Doomsday Cage match debacle. And, it's not to say that everything around this period in WCW was the drizzling shits, because, I'll get to the Sting Luger stuff a bit later on, but contextually, looking at the scope of the business by now and just how terrible things were with both products, that early summer period for WCW with Hall and Nash jumping ship, it easily was one of the most critical moments that could have happened to the business, period. Not just WCW, but WWF too. So, here we are, SuperBrawl VI. The event took place on February 11th, 1996 at the Bayfront Arena in St. Petersburg, Florida. I believe attendance for the show was sold out at 7,200 people. Buy rate for the show did a 0.6. And I'll get to the overall thoughts, analysis at the end, but just to give you an appetizer for what's to come. This was one of those shows where you had moments of good, but the bad stuff was truly bad, bordering on horrific. And really, the show is only really remembered for one infamous moment, and that's about it. But we'll do my best to make this one entertaining. Kicking things off with the street fight between Public Enemy and the Nasty Boys. And my God, that Public Enemy dub-over music. That is all. This was not the classic street fight where Dusty Rhodes was the highlight of the match, just laughing his ass off on commentary while everyone was knocking each other out with plunder. I don't remember what pay-per-view that was. I know the match had Harlem Heat in it. And I'm pretty sure that happened in the year 96 too. But speaking of plunder and hitting each other with shit, that was pretty much what every WCW hardcore match was around this time. And also what every subsequent hardcore garbage match in wrestling has tried to echo since. It was, I'm going to hit you in the head with something, and then you're going to hit me in the head with something. And that's exactly what these guys did for about 8 minutes. I think my favorite part of the match was the incredibly stupid part during the split screen, and it happened about 3 minutes in, where Sags hits Johnny Grunge with a pile driver on a trash can, and the ref called for a rope break, with Sags trying to get the pinfall. If you need me to explain why rope breaks in a no DQ anything goes match is dumb, you obviously have not watched a pro wrestling match before. It also wasn't to say that Dusty Rhodes did not have a great line in this match. I believe there was a part where Dusty made reference to the guys using Australian arm drags. I love Dusty. So fast forward about 62 unprotected chair shots to the head and no selling train wreck spots later. All four guys end up fighting to the top of the stage area. And the finish to the car wreck garbage fight is Sags missing a senton splash through a table from the stands. Then for no reason at all, Grunge throws one of the broken table pieces onto Sags' face. And then he pins him. It was a total mess. It was four fat, out-of-shape dudes hitting each other with a bunch of random shit, and crowd loved it. And it was also made purely entertaining listening to the commentary team. I do remember seeing a lot of these kinds of matches around this time with Public Enemy and the Nasty Boys, and as a kid, I know I was only probably 8 or 9 years old watching this stuff at the time. Obviously didn't think too much for the long-term consequences of guys hitting each other with headshots, using weapons, and, recklessly dropping each other on shit left and right. But even from a young age, having not grown up watching the hardcore style, I guess I was always kind of subconsciously turned off from it. But I also understand that it served a purpose in the business, and this really was the precursor to what would become such a popularized form of the product for, not just the beginning of the Attitude Era and ECW, but even carrying over to what we see today. Just take out the chair shots to the head and replace it with guys taking pointless thumbtack bumps and staple guns to the testicles and lighting firecrackers up each other's assholes. You take your pick with what you prefer watching. We then cut to the back with Gene Okerlund, beginning by briefly plugging the WCW hotline, which they did blur the number out on screen. I can only imagine what would happen if someone actually dialed that number today, because Okerlund did announce it on screen and they did not blur it out. And eventually he brings in Conan to hype up his U.S. heavyweight title match for later in the night. And I did not write anything down about that promo. Second match for the card, the TV Championship match. Johnny B. Bad with the lovely Kimberly Page versus Diamond Dallas Page. Of course, around this point, Kimberly and DDP had some kayfabe drama going on where Kimberly had split from him to join up with Johnny, and DDP was trying to get her back by gifting her with flowers and the whole sorts, basically simping to regain her approval. This match was what I ended up referring to in my notes as a match with a whole lot of moves that would never end. And it's not to say it was a bad match, because there was some good stuff in here, but I don't know, it's one of those matches where you're watching it, it's just about surpassing the 11 or 12 minute mark, and the only thing you can really think is, why are they giving so much time to Johnny B. Bad versus Diamond Dallas Page on the second match on the card? That on top of the fact that they're doing like 1,300 back and forth false finishes and kickouts. My favorite part of the match, classic Bobby Heenan line, Johnny B. Bad gives the elbow drop to DDP's groin, which Tony refers to as the solar plexus, and Dusty responds by going, "The what?" And Heenan goes, "It's about 20 miles just outside Phoenix." They also had the story going on throughout the match where Paige kept calling for Kimberly to hold up the 10 card on the outside, so she eventually pulled out a 0. And like I said, they went back and forth for a while. There was a very long heat angle where Paige worked Bad over, and in the end, Paige went for the tombstone, but Bad reversed it into a tombstone of his own and got the pin. It was fine. But again, one of those matches where it probably goes about 5 minutes longer than really needed. That said, when you compare it to the rest of the card, this was probably one of the better matches on the show. I don't remember a whole lot about Mark Merrow's run in WCW around this time. I remember this was still about a year or so before peak DDP in WCW. I think 96 was the year he ended up winning the Diamond Ring, Delia Bob, but even by this point, he was still mostly considered an undercard guy. Hadn't really found his footing yet as far as getting a crowd response and getting over with the Diamond Cutter out of nowhere thing. But, just historically not a whole lot to write home about with this one. Following that, Harlem Heat in the back for a promo with Mean Gene. Just a brief plug for the upcoming tag match. It is kind of funny going back in the archives and looking at a lot of Stevie Ray's stuff. Dude could cut a hell of a promo, but god damn was he the shits in the ring. So we get the first of 2 World Tag Team title defenses on the show. Harlem Heat challenging then champs Lex Luger and Surfer Sting. God, man. Seeing Surfer Sting in 96, it is almost too surreal. Not just because of the fact that it ended up being the final year and the final era of Surfer Sting before Crow Sting's debut in the fall of that year, but also because it was a completely different personality and a character just in comparison to the latter Sting incarnations. It really just goes to show the talent of Steve Borden and what he was able to portray and evolve with his persona throughout his career. But as I alluded to earlier, one of my favorite storylines to go back and analyze really the story that made me a true Sting fan. And, having watched his real early work from those great matches with Flair from the late 80s and early 90s, the whole evolution of Sting's character from early 96 through, I'd say basically the end of 97, where they got to the blow-off with Hogan and Sting at Starrcade, that was one of the most captivating stories I can recall from such an early childhood. And, the whole thing really dates back to the Sting and Luger alliance around this point. The story was that Luger had jumped ship to WCW on the first episode of Nitro, and for basically that entire run from late 95 through late 96, Luger was an outsider. He was the untrustworthy slimeball heel that nobody liked because they weren't really able to decipher whether his allegiance lied with WWF or WCW. But he was the inaugural outsider before Hall and Nash even showed up in the company. And it was so great with what they were able to do with the pairing of Luger and Sting because, they were longtime friends dating back. Sting had his loyal fan base and he was a clear-cut good guy. And, even though Luger was loyal to Sting as a friend, he was still despised by most of the roster and the fans, and he worked most of his matches as a heel. And, while Luger was doing all these dastardly, underhanded things behind Sting's back, Sting was totally clueless. He had everyone shouting from the rooftop at him that he can't trust Luger, he's a sleazy liar, blah, blah, and Sting never believed him. And, the whole story going into this match was Luger cheated to win the belts for him and Sting in a TV match with Harlem Heat a couple weeks prior, but Sting was completely unaware of that fact. And of course, hindsight is 20/20, so you look at it years later as a smart fan and ask, so you're telling me Sting never watched the tape back? That he was so completely oblivious to Luger being a dirty, cheating asshole prick behind his back, he just never thought twice to watch the footage back and think, oh yeah, Luger is a scumbag cheater. Oops. Guess I'm an idiot. But, you look past that. Everything they did with these guys were great. And the match made perfect sense as a layout. Well, right up until the finish when it completely fell off a cliff. But Sting did a lot of the work for the team. Luger cowered on the apron, really only wanted to tag in when Harlem Heat was in trouble. Booker and Stevie ended up taking over on Luger. They got the hot tag to Sting. That was a fake out. Things ended up breaking down with both teams fighting outside the ring. And amidst the chaos and pandemonium, Hawk and Animal run down while the ref's on the outside. I think it was Animal that hit Stevie with a gimmick while he was going for the powerbomb. And Luger ended up stacking Stevie up for the 3. And while the finish was complete and utter bullshit, my confusion, moreover, came with wondering whether or not the Road Warriors were the babyfaces or the heels here. Because Luger's clearly a heel, and Sting's clearly a babyface. Harlem Heat, I think they were supposed to be babyfaces in this match, although they did work a good chunk of the match as heels anyway. But then the Road Warriors ran in to screw Harlem Heat over, so, then I figured, okay, maybe Harlem Heat were the faces after all. And then it hit me not long after that. Wait, why in the fuck would the Road Warriors be heels? When in the history of the business have Hawk and Animal as bad guys ever worked? The answer is never, no matter what company tried it. So I had no idea what they were going for with the finish here, but it did set up the Road Warriors against Luger and Sting for later, which, well, we'll get into it. Suffice to say, I was let down in the end. We did get a great post-match promo with Luger and Sting. And again, the story's great. Luger and Sting keep finding ways to retain the belts by hook or by crook. And while Luger's very cognizant of the fact that he keeps holding on to the belts through nefarious means, Sting is totally oblivious to everything going on. He's just thinking, nothing weird going on here. Just Luger being a down-to-earth good guy and not doing anything dastardly behind my back to make me think otherwise. Despite the fact that the people are booing him. And it's one of those circumstances where you look at it through the lens of modern eyes and think, Sting's kind of a stupid babyface in this whole thing, but they had a clear path where they were going, and they stuck the course with it, especially Sting. And, It's also important to keep in mind, too, Luger was vociferously booed from the bulk of the crowd around this period in 96, but if you fast forward a little over a year later, this dude was main eventing Nitro against Hogan for the world title, and he was also one of the hottest baby faces in the business for a good period in 97. It's incredible to see just how quickly the landscape of things can change in this business. Next match was One Man Gang versus Conan for the U.S. Heavyweight title. As soon as One Man Gang came out to the Dungeon of Doom music, the first thing that came to my mind was One Man Gang officially a member of the DOD at one point? I know they went through about 37 different group members in the span of 3 or so years that faction was a thing, but I don't ever remember One Man Gang being a member of that stable. I did remember the infamous Giant Haystacks debut around this period, or I forget what he went by in WCW. What do they call him, the Loch Ness Monster or something like that? At best, I could call the match boring, which I could probably classify all of Conan's matches around this period, or just his career in general. They did some moves for a while, crowd really wasn't into it. There's a random point about midway through where One Man Gang was in control of the match. He hit a move on Conan, and then for no reason at all, he just pulled him up before the 3. Legendary. One thing I could honestly think the entire time this match was going on, considering how deep the talent pool actually was in WCW around this point, to think that one of their featured title matches on this show going in was Conan versus One Man Gang, of all people, kind of goes to show just how completely out to lunch this booking crew was around this period. And after Conan retained, this was pretty much the point in the show where things really took a nosedive for the worse. And not just because of what came up next. Before we get to that, though, we cut to the back so Mean Gene could inform us of a toilet leak in the building. No, I'm not kidding. That was actually a thing that happened. I presume that was ad-libbed. But he did bring in Hawk and Animal for a promo. And just as I've been talking about with the Road Warriors on these NWA shows and how Hawk has his moments where he delivers some great lines, he had another one here where he addresses what him and Animal are going to do to Sting and Luger later on. They're going to, and I quote, deviate their septum and, quote, detach their retinas. Which I mistook at first as him saying rectums instead of retinas. Kind of wish he'd have said the former instead, but still a great line. So then we get the match. The legendary and infamous match of SuperBrawl 96. Kevin Sullivan, a.k.a. Taskmaster, versus Brian Pillman in the I Respect You strap match. And, I don't know, it's one of those matches where you watch it live for the first time, and it's a very bizarre, weird situation. Can't really make heads or tails of what went down. Obviously, you don't have any context as to why things went down the way that they did, but you still remember it years later after the fact. And, once the stories start coming out with how everything went down and what did lead to it, you kind of start to go back and look at it and kind of fit the missing puzzle pieces together. And like I said from the jump, this show is really only remembered for this one match. And really, I don't even think you can call it a match. The whole idea behind the gimmick was that it was essentially an I Quit strap match, where the only way to win was to get the opponent to say, I respect you, instead of I quit. And, well, they ring the bell. They do some very messy bar brawling for about a minute. The strap ends up coming loose from both guys' wrists. And then Pillman rips the mic out of the ref's hands, and he turns to Sullivan and goes, quote, I respect you, Booker Man. And then he walked out. So the $1 million question comes into play. What the fuck happened? Was it a work? Was it a shoot? Is it somewhere in the middle where it's a combination between a work and Pillman perhaps taking a little too much leniency with what he was directed to do and pushing the boundaries too far? Well, it's interesting because, the general understanding of everything in hindsight now is that everything that transpired in this segment was indeed a work. What we saw on camera was more or less designed to happen. That was the plan. And I'm not going to go into the whole backstory of Brian Pillman and his whole run in WCW. I highly encourage you to actually watch the 83 Weeks podcast with Eric Bischoff and Conrad Thompson, where they actually cover the Pillman story in great detail, because it is very fascinating. And, I really think that Eric did a nice job breaking down the subtleties and the nuances of the story, and the way he puts it is that in his mind, he feels that the story just didn't connect with people in execution. And obviously, I wasn't there, and I'm not the expert analyst, so my understanding of the particulars and the details, I am purely judging based on what I've read and what I have listened to from the so-called experts over the years. The whole fallout to the story with Pillman getting fired the next day after the pay-per-view so he could jump ship to ECW, eventually with the idea being to bring him back into the fold down the road, and, of course, we remember that never ended up happening. By 97, Pillman wound up in the WWF, and, he did go on to do some great things there. Feud with Austin, the real culmination of Pillman's loose cannon character, just coming to full fruition by that period. And that was one of the most remarkable things that people look back throughout his entire career. I still don't know what exactly happened with Bischoff and Pillman's relationship, whether or not the whole plan to bring him back was a thing or not, whether Bischoff was lying. I have no way of knowing. But from what I can tell you watching this back again, it is still a very weird and unsettling moment, and especially knowing with what the fallout actually was and where Pillman ended up in the future, because this was the last time we would ever see Brian Pillman in a WCW ring. And he's walking to the back, flipping the fans off, and, they made sure that they didn't keep the camera on him for too long, which I think was a clever production decision on their part if this was going to be part of the overall story. And that brings out Arn Anderson, and what I wrote down here as something my 69-year-old father would wear, attire. It is a button-down Oxford shirt tucked in with red short shorts, long dad socks, and brown boots. And him and Sullivan proceed to have an impromptu chaotic strap match, which ends with Ric Flair running in to call the match off, and Sullivan and Anderson just stop fighting. Flair goes into a big spiel about how they're family, this whole thing's a conspiracy to turn the Dungeon of Doom and the Horsemen against one another, says they should be a fighting unit, and that was it. They all go to the back on relatively good terms. Pillman is never to be seen or spoken of again. I believe except for a brief comment from Bischoff on the following Nitro where he basically let everyone know that Pillman will never be seen or heard from again on WCW television. And he wasn't lying. So yeah, that was all bullshit. What wasn't bullshit was the following promo with Mean Gene, Jimmy Hart, and The Giant. And I really want you all to keep this in mind. Say what you want about Paul White, Big Show, The Giant, whatever you want to refer to him as. Yes, he's been around for a long time. Probably an argument to be made that he has overstayed his welcome, especially in the WWE. But that guy was a real talent. He was a real talented big guy. He could talk, he could work, he could play both sides of the aisle to perfection. He understood the business, and he was one of the most professional guys that everybody got along with and everybody wanted to work with. And at the point that we were at right now with the Giant, at this very pay-per-view of Super Brawl VI in this backstage promo, Paul White was in the business for 9 months. Think about that. He debuted not just with WCW, but his professional wrestling debut period was in May of 95 at Slamboree. He was immediately put into a program with Hulk Hogan by the following October, 5 months into his debut. 5 months, not 5 years, months. He was a world champion. And everything he did from the time he showed up to, probably about the point that he just gave up trying and got fat. So we're talking like tail end of 98 going into 99. Big Show was a natural. Everything he did, he picked up on instantly. Promo work, nailed it. Working the big guy style, nailed it. Ring presence, nailed it. Facials, nailed it. Charisma, nailed it. Timing, nailed it. Being able to effectively work as a monster heel, nailed it. He had been in the business less than 12 months, and he was already a seasoned veteran by the time that he reached the midway point of his run with the company. That's no small feat. That's like Brock Lesnar territory of awesomeness. I mean, in modern day terms, it's basically on par with what's going on with Rex Steiner in NXT right now. And you think about all the people that came and went in the business over the years, like especially during this period in the business. Guys that just didn't get it, guys that never got better, guys that just weren't cut and molded for the business. Giant, Big Show, Paul White. He really was one of a kind. And especially for a unique guy like him. 7 foot, 420 pounds, but the dude was in shape. He's built like an athlete, and he just naturally got everything from such an early age. What a talent. And, I've always considered myself a Big Show fan. Wouldn't say he ever ranked among, like, my top favorites or anything like that, but, I put it on a similar pedestal with guys like Mark Henry and Kane. They were never my favorites growing up, but goddamn, the older I get, the more I appreciate what those guys were able to do in the business, because, man, were they talented. So that brought us to the Road Warriors versus Sting and Luger for the tag belts. And I probably should have figured that I was in for a rough one here when the first 5 fucking minutes of this segment is Lex Luger stalling and running away like a coward from the Road Warriors. And the match was fairly similar in terms of layout to the Harlem Heat match. Sting did the bulk of the work. Luger only tagged in when the faces were vulnerable. They kind of lather, rinse, repeated this formula for most of it. God bless Hawk and Sting. I have no idea what the fuck happened here, but these poor bastards locked up at the beginning of this match. Hawk went to whip Sting into the ropes. Sting comes back off for a neck breaker. And not only did Hawk royally fuck up taking this bump, but these guys caught completely lost trying to recover with chain wrestling for the next 30 seconds. Like, I almost felt bad for them. Just two guys on totally different planets here trying to do moves and completely screwing it up left and right. God, that was brutal to watch. That was the most visible, horrible spot of the match that I wrote down. The rest of it was very boring and not all that good. And again, I'm going back to the Sting-Luger dynamic. It was very clever, and I enjoyed it for what it was. But you especially look at it during this period in the business when the fans were still mostly casual viewers, not really attuned to the inner workings of the business. And you can really kind of tell that even going back around this point, they really didn't know how to respond to the Sting and Luger pairing. Like, Sting's clearly a good guy, and Luger's clearly a bad guy, which the fans know. And they kind of sort of acknowledge the fact that they're friends, so Like, they understand why they're tag partners, but the problem is they just don't know the reason they're longtime friends and why Sting is completely oblivious to all of Luger's heel tactics to begin with. So, like, it makes it really hard for people to even know how to react to their matches. All the while, they're wrestling the Road Warriors, who I think are baby faces, but like, it's impossible to tell given the fact that they did a blatant run-in earlier on and they screwed over another babyface tag team for absolutely no reason at all. Like, this whole thing was just a problem of fans not knowing who to cheer for and who to boo. And all the while, after having to sit through a moderately boring tag match with no heat, they wind up doing a lame double countout finish, which pissed the people off even more. And considering the 4 guys that were in this thing, I really can't think of a reason why this should have been as bad as it was. Whether it was a chemistry thing, a booking thing, the character dynamics, a combination of the bunch. I don't know what went wrong here, but yeah, this didn't work. But the DQ fucked finish was well worth it, as we cut to the back for a Ric Flair promo with Nancy. And aside from the visual of seeing the wonderful woman on screen, it was also every Ric Flair promo you've ever heard. And the times are no different, be it the mid-'80s or the late '90s. Flair is all about having a good time, making money, partying, and fucking women in hotel rooms. And if you ever catch a Ric Flair promo where none of these topics are mentioned in some way, shape, or form, please inform me as to one that exists, because I need to see it to believe it. He also basically spoiled the finish to the Flair Savage cage match by saying that he's bringing Elizabeth home with him after the show is over, which, well, I can't really determine whether or not that ended up happening, but Elizabeth did indeed turn to join with Flair. Spoiler alert. And this was followed with Miss Elizabeth and Randy Savage in the back doing a promo with Mean Gene. And thank the good Lord above, they actually had Savage come in to do the promo. There was a period for about the first minute here where it was just Gene and Liz on screen. I really thought that they were going to have Liz try and cut a promo. God bless Liz. Beautiful woman. Many great qualities. Promo work, not among those great qualities. In fact, pretty much anything Liz ever did in the wrestling business that did not directly involve her just standing there and being gorgeous, usually never good. So that brings us to our semi-main for the night. Ric Flair versus Randy Savage for the WCW World Heavyweight title in the cage. I did laugh at Buffer's announcement for Macho Man's entrance gear, wearing blue and yellow, to which I immediately retorted with, and the other assorted colors on the left pant leg. Before the bell even rings, we get Ric Flair trying to lure Elizabeth over to kissing him, because as the stated intent was from Flair earlier on, not only was he there to win the world title, but more importantly, he was there to bring Liz home with him so they could fuck. Priorities, people. Priorities. So, God, how do you even break this one down? Well, I will get to the overbooking mess that went down at the end, but on a whole, I would say I've seen better Flair Savage matches. In comparison to most of the garbage that occurred on this show, this was probably match of the night. The competition level was not that high, but I mean, generally it would still even qualify as a good cage match, I guess. But there was also a lot of very cringy stuff that happened here. And no, I'm not just talking about seeing Flair's bare ass. I think most wrestling fans that have followed Flair throughout his career have seen plenty of Ric Flair ass, whether or not they ever wanted to. There's a spot about 2 minutes into this match where Ric Flair heaved Macho Man into the cage. And folks, when I say heaved Macho Man into the cage, I am not exaggerating. Flair threw Savage full force, body first into the cage, and Savage folded up like an accordion in the ropes, and he was tangled upside down in the ropes. I pronounced him dead upon impact. And it was not too long after that where they For some reason, they did a random angle where Flair just punched the referee and laid him out, all of which led to, well, nothing. Ref was back up a minute later and just calling the action like nothing ever happened. The spot in this match where Macho Man did the giant axe handle off the top of the cage and took the gut shot from Flair coming down, how this man didn't shatter his ankles, I will never know. What a fucking athlete that guy was. And again, I wrote this down for comedic purposes, but it's not entirely untrue. I don't think there is a man in the history of wrestling whose bare ass I have not seen more of than Ric Flair. That is a direct quote that I wrote down. Only thing I hated about the match, other than woman shrieking for 75% of it, the random points where referee Randy Eller just started getting physical with the wrestlers for no reason. There's a point in this match where Flair had Macho Man in the figure four, and for reasons I was unable to determine, Randy just grabbed Flair by the hair and yanked him off of him. And Flair sold this by standing up, turning to do a confrontation with Randy, and then he just kept beating on Savage. And like I said, things totally broke down by the finish. First, they do a false finish where Flair gets the 2.5 count on Savage, but then the timekeeper rings the bell anyway. Whoops. And while both guys are bleeding and totally exhausted, Woman goes to throw powder into Savage's eyes through the cage, completely misses him, and while that's going on, Liz hands Flair her shoe through the cage door on the other end of the ring. Yes, the cage door, which is now open, because they did a spot that occurred moments before where Flair got launched into the cage and the door accidentally sprung open. And while the copious amounts of bullshit interference is going on inside a steel cage, mind you. So even by the late 90s, they had totally killed the cage gimmick dead. Somewhere in the mess, Flair pinned Savage. I mean, hats off to Flair and Savage for making the most of it, but this is a total train wreck. Like, between the fact that the match probably went 10 minutes too long, the cage door randomly opening after the chain broke loose, Woman completely missing throwing the powder into Macho Man's face, but he sold it anyway. This is one of those matches where everything that could possibly go wrong did in fact go wrong. But because the match had Flair and Savage in it, and they were both professional and they were both great, they actually made it passably good by comparison. And it actually hit me as Savage and Hogan were going up the ramp, and Tony had mentioned it on commentary. Oh yeah, I completely forgot that this match was the World Heavyweight Championship match for the show. Yeah, Ric Flair won the belt, and I completely forgot about it the moment it happened. And the entire chaotic finish of the match really was an omen of how bad things would really get in WCW main events, especially by the time the NWO showed up. I've read the death of WCW cover to cover twice through. I'm telling you, man, Brian Alvarez ain't wrong. Don't agree with him on everything he says, but he hit the nail on the head when it came to his statement about WCW pay-per-view cards around that point. It is as accurate as you can get. When it came to WCW, the majority of the time when you ordered a pay-per-view, you would expect a great undercard with great matches and great workers, and a completely shitty, overbooked, clusterfuck main event that just left you totally bewildered and angry by the end. True statement. And yes, this was the semi-main with Flair and Savage in this match, but it is the personification of what you would pretty much come to expect out of WCW main events going forward. They also shot the angle afterwards with Hogan coming down to help Savage to the back, which I thought was funny because while Hogan is helping Savage to the back, the announcers are informing us that we are about to cut to the back for a Mean Gene promo with Hulk Hogan. So we had to wait for Hogan to walk up the rampway, walk through the curtain, find his way to the interview area to find Mean Gene, just so he could say a whole lot of nothing, and then go back out to the ring for his match with Giant, which was up next. boy, Hogan was getting a real workout on this show. Why not? Got to burn some extra calories. And that's right, the main event for the show, Hulk Hogan versus the Giant in an unsanctioned cage match. What made this match unsanctioned? I have no idea. So by this point in the show, 2.5 odd hours in, I was on the verge of falling asleep, and I'll admit, watching Hogan and the Giant in the main event match here, doing a lumbering big man match, did not help in preventing me from drifting into a coma. It was, at best, mediocre. The abundant thing that stood out to me right from the jump is just how bad Hogan was getting booed here. And I'll tell you, like, as much as we spend years and years talking about, John Cena going against the grain as a babyface, the whole Roman Reigns babyface push that lasted like 4 years and never worked. You can even put it in perspective today with what's going on in AEW with Cody Rhodes pretending to be a babyface despite getting massively booed in just about every venue they're live at. Even through all that, dude, this is still Hulk Hogan we're talking about. And even by the year 96, it's not even like the Hogan split crowd was a revolutionary concept. Like, Hogan was getting pretty audible boos from fans even going back as early as 93 in the WWF. Probably wasn't apparent as it was by now in 96, where kind of was like an 80-20 split leaning toward booing. Yet here we are in 1996. Hogan is still sporting the red and yellow attire, going against the grain as a good guy, and the fans aren't buying it. And what an opportune time for him to have swapped roles by July of this same year when Hogan finally ditched the red and yellow for the black and white and turned heel for the first time in a big major capacity. That was, it was probably the best thing for his career. And, this match was every Hogan babyface match you'd ever seen from the previous 8 or 9 years. It was 2 minutes of fiery offense, 10 minutes of selling, and the big comeback. A little bit of modification with this one. Hogan hit 3 leg drops. He also gave Giant the big body slam before climbing out of the cage, but that's pretty much all there was to it. The 5-minute period where the Big Show had Hogan in the bear hug in the middle of the ring, I think I started breaking down crying. I was so bored. But that was probably the best finish possible in order to put Hogan over, but to also avoid having Giant take the pinfall, which I'm pretty sure he still had not taken a pinfall loss by this point yet. The afterbirth was, more of the talking point of the segment, though, because Sullivan ends up leveling Hogan with the chair as soon as he climbs out of the cage. Hogan ends up chasing him back into the cage, and eventually the whole dungeon files out from the back to get in the ring, while Hogan begins to kick all of their asses. Like a 7 or 8 on 1 advantage in favor of Hogan, and he was still throwing him around the cage left and right. You had Sullivan in there, Jimmy Hart, Mang and Barbarian, the Zodiac. God, remember the Zodiac? You had One Man Gang, John Tenta, the whole shebang. Again, just doing exactly what the faction was designed to do from the beginning. Feed Hogan a bunch of dorky cartoon characters so he could look good and dominant. And of course, the big angle at the end was giant haystacks coming out to try and get in the cage with Hogan, but the whole dungeon crew held him back, and that was how they faded to black. To tease a program that I don't believe ever ended up happening. In fact, now that I recall, I don't remember a single thing that Haystacks ever did in WCW during his short run. I think with the way I remember the story going, he was going to do the feud with Hogan, but I can't remember if he got sick or what happened, but I remember he ended up leaving the company shortly thereafter. But they were really pushing this angle hard, so it kind of sucks things never turned out the way they planned. Not that the human population was ever craving a Hulk Hogan giant haystacks program. Good fucking Lord. Speaking of not craving things, really didn't crave this pay-per-view when it was all said and done. Like I touched on earlier, there were a couple highlights on the show, most of it being from the commentary team, which was just fucking awesome. But the bad stuff on the show was really, really bad. And aside from the Flair Savage Cage match, which wasn't all that good to begin with, scoping out this card again, I really wouldn't say there's anything worth going back to check out. For pure train wreck purposes, or, if you have the urge to fruitlessly torture yourself, I would tell you to go back and check out the tag title matches, the first and the second one. Maybe watch the main event if you can survive the tag matches, and that's pretty much it. And honestly, the Brian Pillman match isn't even something I could recommend checking out because, there isn't even anything spectacularly train wreck bad about it or anything. It was just a dumb angle that they shot to try and be edgy and create a moment. It was nowhere near Bash at the Beach 2000 level stupid, but the insider story to the whole thing is kind of more interesting than the actual lived angle, if I'm being honest. Because the angle itself only lasted a full minute before it was over. And that's really what the show was remembered for when it was all said and done. I respect you, Booker man. And the rest is just a muddled mess and hodgepodge of unmemorable crap. It really goes to show just how terrible things were around this period for WCW. Especially when you put it into perspective with the talent they had on this show, it's surprising. You had Hogan, Flair, Savage, Sting, Luger, the Road Warriors, even at early incarnations of Harlem Heat and DDP. And this show still stunk like monkey balls. But, again, that was kind of a reflection of where the wrestling business was around this period in early 96. A business that was just kind of stuck in spin cycle mode and had no clue or vision of where it wanted to go. And it really wasn't until May, a few months later, when Hall showed up, where things really turned around for the better. But I hope you all enjoyed that retro recap of SuperBrawl VI, which we, of course, put in place of World Class Championship Wrestling for this week. Next week, we will be taking a look at the WWF In Your House event from February 18th, again in placement of World Class Championship Wrestling. And we'll get back to the World Class recaps the following week. If you enjoyed the show, make sure you show your appreciation by subscribing, liking the show, and leave a comment down below to share your thoughts on what we discussed today. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that SuperBrawl show if you even have any. But I will be back on Monday for the next installment of the FSWR podcast. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you all on the flip side. Peace out.